Is this everybody? 1, 2, 3. Hello. Okay, it's not going to really be a call and response thing the whole time, but welcome. Welcome to celebrating the life of Sam Austin Howell. My name is Sean Enright. I'm a friend of Sam's from college in Northwestern, from around, let's round it down to 40 years ago. And I'm going to introduce the speakers as we listen to them and join with them in remembering Sam. It's a really sort of a wonderful, heady, and sad moment at the same time that we're all together to remember Sam at this point. It's sad because he is gone, but what's wonderful is finally, for all of us, in a sort of delayed motion, to be in the room together, grieving for him and remembering him. So there will be emotion at the mic, and hopefully there will be some other, there will be a host of other emotions at the same time, since that's who we're talking about in Sam Howell. And at least one of our speakers is currently flying in the air from Boston, Provincetown, Mark Conklin and his wife Noel, and they may very well show up and speak when they arrive too. So let's all be loosey-goosey and remember just to sort of hold on to each other and to hold on to this act of remembering that we're doing today. That is very important to all of us, and we're going to hear in a variety of voices. So. That's all I'm going to say at the top, but I'll have a great deal to say at the end of the affair too. Please turn off your cell phones. My life as a stewardess is finally here. Somebody lost a pair of sunglasses, which I believe we've deposited at the front desk. When you come up to speak, and I've spoken to almost everybody, I hope, some of whom I met for the first time, who are speaking, the speakers are going to try to take their masks off to speak because it's very difficult, with a PA system to be clear with a mask on. So, hope that's okay with everybody. Okay, so we're going to start with another dear friend of mine, and probably for me, and I'm sure for everyone, the most important person in the room today. Sam's wife of 24 years, Mary Pepito, his best friend, and his beloved colleague professionally, too, for that same span of time, who's going to welcome us and say a few words. Mary?
Yeah, I'm going to try to stand up on the thing. Thank you all. All right. And I am a speaker, much like Sam, since he's trained me to speak, who makes a lot of movement. So I might be, moving around and having to deal with this. But I wanted to thank all of you for being here to celebrate and remember Sam. I know many of you have traveled from very long distances to be here, and some at great expense. And I am so grateful and moved by all the love for Sam here. Sam was my rock. He was my ride or die. He was my lobster. He was my teacher and advisor in all things literary and all things sports related. He was my partner in crime, my soulmate, my best friend. And I am very lucky to have been loved by Sam and to have lived with him for the past 24 years. We communicated heart to heart, soul to soul. We didn't need words. Sam was brilliant, hilarious, and a master of the highbrow and the lowbrow. Sam was also a master at creating original nicknames, as many of you know here, since you have one. And he called me his Schmunkety, or Schmunk for short. And he would, as he was leaving the apartment or the Cape House, say, "Stay schmunkety." So Sam and I met in 1993 in the training class at the Legal Aid Society, where we were training to be public defenders in the Bronx. And we were about 20 or so people, and we became a very tight-knit group of attorneys and friends, and many of you are here. We would hang out together, have lunch together at that amazing Bronx diner, Fun City. It wasn't that amazing. We celebrated the extreme highs and, unfortunately, the extreme lows of being a public defender. Sam was immediately recognized for his comic genius, his quick wit, and his amazing gifts in the courtroom. Many of us in that tight-knit group of 1993 friends would almost every day after work gather at an Upper West Side bar called the High Life, and a few of Sam's hilarious friends would join us, frequently Tucker, sometimes Mark and Noel, who are on their way, sometimes Kat, and he always was the center of attention. People gravitated towards him. He was, as we all know, one of a kind. And although he asked me out during that first week of training class, I had my own personal drama going on. And we became the best of friends instead. Sam liked to say he liked to play the long game. Sam was a person unlike anyone I had ever met. He had no ego, and yet a huge ego. He was sly and stealth, and yet very vulnerable. And it was his vulnerability, his honesty, and his humor that won me over. On a beautiful summer day in 1996 at the house that we stay at in Truro, Sam proposed to me. We were married in Oklahoma in the heart of summer, and many of you who are here today traveled to the middle of Oklahoma in the heat and humidity to celebrate our wedding. Many of you are here today, and I thank you so much for that. Every summer we return to the Cape. Sam, of course, for Sam, of course, the Cape is his happy place. And we spent many a late night at the house dancing, singing, drinking, playing games, poker, charades, that Sam called charades, as only Sam can do, and making a late night, not very sober trek to either the pond or the ocean. We shared so many fun times with a rotating cast of friends and families, both my family and his family, And it is such a special experience that we had there with so many of you. Sam, of course, dominated the Cape. I'm sure you read that Sam dominated everything he did. Sam would wake up in the morning at the Cape and he would say, while lying in bed, I have already dominated this day. Sam liked to get up, as he said, at the crack of noon. And he would frequently, especially when we were at the Cape, have one eye open and one eye closed and tell me that he was not, quote unquote, up for the day because he only had one eye open. He still had one eye closed. And he would, despite that, get up, make breakfast, eat breakfast, and return to bed. Sam had a special appreciation for the wounded, damaged, and the vulnerable, which explains why he was a lifelong, very devoted fan of the Red Sox, even during the very difficult years. He also especially loved our not so especially nice to everyone Dalmatian Sadie. Sadie was not comfortable with most people, but especially strangers. But Sam was very gregarious. And so he would invite people to our apartment and the house at the Cape, and he would instruct people just don't look her in the eyes. And this was even though as you opened the door to her apartment, she would be running down the hall, charging at you and barking. Or in the front yard of the Cape House, charging at your car as you entered the driveway. And this mostly worked. And she has only bitten a few of you who are here. And fewer still, more than once. Eve. Sam also was instrumental in adopting our blind, adorable, epileptic black lab puppy, Steve Hudson. He, along with 10,000 other applicants, tried to persuade the shelter that we were the perfect home for this blind, epileptic, adorable black lab puppy that was bred to be a seeing eye dog. And so, I think most of you know, he persuaded them, but he did that by his devotion, which was visiting Steve Hudson in the shelter every day, usually with a new dog toy. And so we brought Steve Hudson home, and we were the perfect home. And Sadie, reluctantly, initially, agreed. So Sam also had developed a special fondness for turtles one day at the Cape. He was on his way back from his usual morning jaunt to Jams. Jams, for those of you who don't know, is an overpriced deli that is unbelievably always staffed with a rotating cast that always manages to be surly and unhappy. But Jams is so amazing, and maybe it's the monopoly, that is pretty awesome. Anyway, every morning usually on his way back from the transfer station. That's what they call the dump here. Sam would stop by Jams, but before he did, he would usually take a dip in the pristine kettle ponds that are one of the most beautiful features here at the Cape. He loved those kettle ponds. But after he did that, he would go to Jams and he would get his usual. And the usual was what he called the papers. Now, the papers were the New York Times, the Cape Cod Times, and the Boston Globe every morning. He would also pick up 2 of the most amazing freshly made baguettes, and for himself, something he called a nasty breakfast sandwich. But on that day, as he was driving around the bend on the road back to our house, and there was nothing more that Sam liked to do than to tool around in his 1989 white Mercedes convertible on a beautiful day listening to Bruce Springsteen. But as he was turning the corner, he sees this little turtle trying to cross the road. So he stops the car, blocking traffic behind him. Not very much, to be fair. He springs into action. He jumps over to the other lane of oncoming traffic. Again, not very much, but still. And he waits there until that little turtle could cross and make passage all the way to the other side of the street. And from that day forward, the Cape crowd, we all knew him as the Turtle Saver. And initially, as I thought about it, I felt that Sam was like a turtle with a hard exterior, but all mushy and loving and feeling inside. But then I realized the better analogy was that I was the turtle. And that Sam has been protecting me, helping me flourish, and he made me a happier, better, more alive person since that first day we met in the training class at the Legal Aid Society in 1993. And I think that's possibly true for many of his friends, his acquaintances even, and his clients. Sam was good at connecting to people, making them feel special and understanding the difficulties of being alive. Sam was an extraordinary, one-of-a-kind guy, a beautiful, empathetic, tortured soul who possibly cared too much about other people and never enough about himself. We have all been better for knowing him, and for some of us, he has saved our lives. I love you, Sam. Stay schmunkety. Go Sox.
Thank you, Mary. We're now going to hear from Jennifer Stonestreet, Sam's oldest friend, who met him at Shady Hill School. Did I get it right?
This is not a good way to start. Okay. Sam was great in front of a crowd. I think we all know this. Whether he was performing in a theatrical production, addressing a jury, giving a toast at a party, talking in front of people came naturally to him, and he loved doing it. I can't help but think that he would have been a lot better at giving this speech than I'm going to be. In fact, I feel a little like I'm trying to cook dinner for Ina Garten. But I'm going to try and honor my friend because I loved him like a brother. Fortunately, I was friends with Sam for over 50 years, so he left me with a lot of material. Don't worry, it's not that long. We met in 4th grade when Sam came to Shady Hill, and we started carpooling home from school since we lived near each other in Newton. In truth, it wasn't really much of a carpool since 3 out of the 4 parents were working in the afternoon. It was more like my mother driving us home when it fit her teaching schedule. A lot of times, we actually took the bus, which took forever since we had to walk to the stop on Mount Auburn Street, ride the bus to Watertown Square, walk up Galen Street to Newton Corner, wait for a bus that I swear was supposed to run every half an hour, ran more like every hour, and ride that bus to Newtonville and walk home from there. It was a slog, and we were super bored, but Sam was funny, and this is how we became friends for life. Even as a little kid, it was obvious that Sam was a special guy, or as one of our classmates put it recently, larger than life without being intimidating. He was smart, talented, athletic, and so sweet. He was good at school, seemingly without trying, good at every sport, and always lead in the play, including our big 8th grade production where he was captain of the HMS Pinafore. How funny is that? I mean, I'm told there's a video, which we've got to find. In any case, he was always kind of a big man on campus, if you could even be that in grade school. But he was also very kind. One time we were riding bikes around the neighborhood, and I hit some sand, going no hands, of course, and I fell off, breaking my collarbone. And what I remember most clearly about this incident is how upset Sam was because I was hurt, and how he walked my bike home for me. We were 13 years old, and here's this young boy walking my bike home. Even then, his instinct was to take care of other people, which he did throughout his life, his siblings, his parents, his clients, his friends, his wife. There were, of course, so many funny times, like how after the divorce, we used to go drinking on Irv's credit card at the top of the Prue, because not only could we get served there, even though we were about 16 years old, but it was the most expensive place we could think of. And we thought of it as a way to extract child support. How's that for twisted thinking? This was our rationalization. Another time, we went skiing at Loon Mountain. I think maybe Irv had a condo there or something. Sarah's nodding. In any case, everything was good, except that Sam had this diesel Rabbit, and it was so cold that the diesel fuel was going to thicken up and the car wasn't going to start. So we weren't going to be able to get to the mountain in the morning. But this wasn't a problem for Sam because he just locked the doors and kept the car running all night long. Over the years, we both went through some hard things too, and I won't talk about too many of them because this day is already sad enough. But I will share one precious memory that always sticks with me. Sam was close to my parents. There were all those car rides and countless hours of watching hoops in my parents' living room. So when my father died of cancer, when he was coincidentally just Sam's age, Sam was devastated like the rest of us. And I don't remember much about the day of that funeral. But after the service, there was a long receiving line outside the church where people were lined up to greet our family. And I remember that Sam just walked to the front of that line to hug me, like that line had nothing to do with him. And he was crying, and I was crying, and he wasn't going to wait in some dumb line to comfort me. He was like that. He wore his heart on his sleeve. Speaking of hearts, I just want to say something about Mary, because she was the best thing that ever happened to Sam. Sam always said he was lucky in love, and it was true. I don't remember when I first met Mary, But I do remember that I had this tremendous sense of relief because she was so beautiful and so smart and so nice. And I thought, wow, she might just be good enough for Sam. And she was. He loved her unconditionally, said she was the better lawyer, which frankly seems statistically unlikely, but if he said it, I believe it. Never complained about her, and recognized that what they had was an uncommon and special thing. I feel good knowing that she was so good for him, and he was so completely happy with her. In recent years, and by that I mean like the last 15 or so, Sam and I had a tradition of playing golf once a summer when he was out here on vacation in Truro. 9 holes at the Chequesset Golf Club in Wellfleet. We would plan this as soon as he confirmed his Cape dates, and it was an outing we'd look forward to for months. The routine was pretty much the same every year. Sam would book the tee time, I'd drive out from Dennis, and Sam would show up early and pay before I got there because he was super generous like that. And then we'd catch up and pooch the ball around. Sam would always be dressed in some ridiculous but somehow typical Sam outfit, cargo shorts, a bandana, and an oversized dress shirt. And he'd always tell me how good I was at golf, which was not true, but was nice to hear anyway. Afterwards, we'd go to Mac Shack and eat oysters and sushi, and inevitably he'd have to head off to pick someone up at the ferry or drop someone off at the ferry. It was always one of the best days of the summer for me. Last year, he canceled at the last minute, but we had a nice long talk on the phone, agreeing to get together in New York in the fall, which we made a date for, but again, he canceled at the last minute. In retrospect, it was obvious he wasn't doing well. I wish I had just shown up in Truro or over at the apartment anyway. It makes me sad to think that I didn't help him when he was suffering. I think a lot of us feel that way. But I want to say one thing I know for sure, which is that he wouldn't have blamed us. And even if he did, he would have forgiven us. He had endless capacity to forgive and accept people, and it was maybe the nicest thing about it. Sam was good at taking care of other people. We all know that, but he wasn't very good at taking care of himself. We used to talk about this. He once told me he was Sam Howell, man of excess. Well, I think this was true, only he was Sam Howell, man of excess talent, excess humor, excess compassion, and excess love. Right now, I don't know how to make sense of what happened. It is hard to understand. I don't know what I believe or don't believe about a universe in which this could happen. I guess I'm a Shady Hill agnostic in this regard. For those of you who went there, you know it wasn't exactly Catholic school. But for today, I'm going to choose to believe that somewhere Sam is cooking up a delicious meal, standing by the stove with an ocean breeze mingling, the breeze mingling with the smell of spices, listening to the Red Sox, with Sadie and the other doggies at his feet, and happy with the knowledge that we all loved him.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Very beautiful. We're in for a ride here, people. Next, I'd like to introduce Eli Howell, Sam's brother, who needs no other introduction. Eli.
Hi, everyone. Um, it's hard for me to put into words how wonderful Sam was and what an important part he was in our family and in my life. Sam's heart was as big as a planet, and he spread his love to many, many people. So much of his love came to me that I would have felt guilty had I not understood that he had an endless supply of this love, a supply which he lavished on everyone he held dear, including his dogs. Sam was one of the smartest people I've known, with an amazing sense of humor, a razor-sharp wit, and a deep, comprehensive understanding of the world. He was my go-to for a good book, a rock I clung to in the hard times, and one of the first with whom I would celebrate my achievements. We shared our political joys and outrages, our culinary delights and disgusts, and our observations of the world and the people in it. I always found great value and comfort in being with and talking with Sam. Many years ago, Sam recommended to me a book which has become one of my favorites, A Constellation of Vital Phenomena by Anthony Mara. I'd like to finish with a passage from that book about endings and loss. At the kitchen table, she examined the glass of ice. Each cube was rounded by room temperature, dissolving in its own remains, and belatedly she understood that this was how a loved one disappeared. Despite the shockwave of walking into an empty flat, the absence isn't immediate, more a fade from the present tense you shared, a melting into the past. Not an erasure, but a conversion in form, from presence to memory, from solid to liquid. And the person you once touched runs over your skin, now in sheets down your back, and you may bathe, may sink, may drown in the memory, but your fingers cannot hold it.
Thanks, Eli. We're now going to hear from Ty and Abram. These are Sam and Mary's next-door neighbors in Manhattan, who've become like family to Sam and Mary over the years. And increasingly, I've been spending holidays and lots of time with them. Ty and Abram.
You okay? Hey, everybody. I think Ty wants to start.
Well, I need some more soda. Gotta find it. Sorry. Hang in there a second. Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for coming. Some of this is a little bit of an improv, so you'll have to bear with me. And a special hello for our magnificent Mary. Samuel's wife. I want to start by saying that I did not call Sam Sam, I called him Samuel. And we had this thing about it, and he said, no one calls me Samuel except my mother. And I said, well, I'm the other person that's going to call you Samuel, and he let me do it. And So I wanted to say that. I want to tell you a couple stories. Like all of us, we all have our stories about Samuel. One is the great, as Mary will tell you, and some of you others know, the great TV story. As you know, Samuel was a big sports fan, but he would come over to our place when we first moved in, and for quite a few years, he'd come in, he'd say, I'm sorry, Reverend Myrna, I'm going to swear for him. He said, you have the damnedest, smallest TV in the world. Why don't you guys get a new TV? What is the problem? So I said to Abram, I said, you know what? When we get a TV, we are going to get the biggest frickin' TV ever. And sure enough, we went out one day, our TV went kaput, and we went down to, where was it? Oh, PJ, is it PJ's? Or whatever the, PC Richards. Anyway, and I said, I want to see the biggest TV you have. I want it to be HD, whatever's the newest thing. And by God, that day we bought the TV, and then as soon as we set it up, I said, wait. And I set it up, and I said, oh, Samuel, you got to come over for a minute, you and Mary. No idea, none. And he walked in, he saw that TV, and he said, oh, my God, that's the biggest TV I've ever seen in my life. And then, of course, it was like, because we live really close, literally next door, he would just walk in and say, oh, there's a game on, I'd like to stay and watch the game. So that is my first story about Sam. And then the second one, to what Jenny had said about his tremendous capacity for empathy, is last year in the height of COVID, we had brought Abram's mother to us, and Sam was the last person to see her alive besides us, and because Abram had to go park the car, and I had Samuel go down with me to bring her up to our apartment, and then after she passed away a couple of days later, Abram and I got COVID, and Abram was very, very sick, and I was sick, but not as sick as he was, and we had to shut down our building, and everyone was, of course, very worried about COVID. This was in the beginning of April, and Sadie, when she decided to leave, her parents decided that she would come into our dog's body, Ella. So we now have Sadie with us. And what happened was the managing agent says, oh, don't worry, we'll get someone to walk Ella, because we weren't allowed to leave the building. He said, don't worry. I said, you're going to find someone to walk Ella? I mean, no, I don't think so. So I did walk Ella a bit, but it was really, Samuel at night would always call me, he and Mary, and walk Ella for us, because that's who he was. And like all of us, we're all really having a hard time that he's gone. And so with that, I'd like to say two other things. The Buddhist priest Issa from Japan, who had lost 3 baby daughters in a row, said this haiku: the world of do is the world of do. And yet, and yet. And lastly, Samuel and I shared a great love for Shakespeare. And this is a passage from Romeo and Juliet. And Juliet was talking about that when Romeo would die, she said, and this is for this gentle, ferocious giant of a human being, this is our Samuel. Take him and cut him out in little stars, and he will make the heaven, and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun. Thank you.
As Ty said, we've been neighbors with Sam and Mary since '99, I think. 2003? Okay. But we share a wall, a long wall. But it never really was a wall. And Sam had this weird quirk. I guess, we took to each other pretty quickly. And he would just come over. I mean, he wouldn't call. He wouldn't announce himself. He would walk in the door. But oddly enough, I didn't mind. So, but we would do the same, Sam and Mary are in 26. We're in 25. And that's the way it was with Sam. Still is with Mary. And I can't tell you how the fact that he's not here has just it's turned my sense of things upside down. And early on, especially, we've been through over a year of COVID, and that long wall really did actually turn into a wall. We didn't see each other. It was only slowly we began to see Sam was having a very hard time with it. I guess that's part of my difficulty in him not being here, is that I have a lot of regrets about things that I could have redone, but you can't go back, I guess. One of the things that that I do is from my own tradition. It's Pure Land Buddhist tradition. Sam had this weird thing about Buddhism. We did talk about it every now and then. I think the first time I realized he had some interest, he had read Mark Epstein's book, which was called Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart. And this was a therapist's book about being both a therapist and a Buddhist. And but Sam would do this weird thing. He would talk about, and Mary knows this, he would, it was almost like, I couldn't tell if he was mocking me or what. But he would come over and he says, I remember it was like this homeless guy, and he would fall into this Sam voice, like Buddhist, everybody's a Buddhist. And he would like pull that out every now and then, like, what? I mean, it's Sam, I guess. But I went looking for this because I guess this is more for me, and maybe it'll touch some of you also. This is a famous letter in the Shin tradition, the Pure Land Buddhist tradition, that a 15th century Japanese Buddhist priest had written a letter to people that were part of his church, and it's called On White Ashes. Yeah, better. I'll try. As we deeply observe the transient form of man's life, we realize that in this world, from beginning to end, nothing is more fragile and fleeting than the course of human life. Thus, we have not heard of anyone receiving human form that lasts for 10,000 years. Life swiftly passes. Can a person preserve his body for 100 years at the present time? Not knowing whether death will come today or tomorrow, those who depart before us are countless as the drops of dew. Therefore, in the morning we may have radiant health. In the evening we may be white ashes. When the winds of uncertainty strike, our eyes are closed forever. When the last breath leaves our body, the healthy color of the face is transformed, and we lose the appearance of radiant life. Our loved ones may gather around and lament, but to no avail. When such an event occurs, the body is sent into an open field and cremated, leaving only white ashes. Thus we see that what man cannot control is the passing away of young and old alike. Therefore, we are brought to understand that each moment of our life, every day, is precious and unrepeatable.
Thank you, Ty and Abram. We're now going to hear from Jenny Blasser, Sam's supervisor at work, and also, and more importantly, a very dear friend. Jenny?
So it will come as no surprise to anyone who knew Sam that he was truly an amazing trial attorney. Perhaps it was a combination of his wicked Northeastern wit, some Midwestern background, and his acting years. But from the moment Sam walked into a courtroom, he captivated a jury, drew immediate admiration and respect from the judge, and a lot of trepidation from opposing counsel, who, if smart, quickly realized they were up against a very, very powerful force. Sam had some signature moves on trial, like when he was cross-examining a police officer, and right after the officer said something that was outlandish inconsistent, or lie, Sam would say, "Really?" in his incredulous tone, then take off his reading glasses, shuffle around the room a little bit, put his reading glasses back on, and slam the officer with the question that made it clear to everyone in the room that this officer was entirely cornered. His delivery was impeccable and really fun to watch. One classic Sam moment will forever stand out in Isabel Matina's life, who was lucky enough to second seat Sam when she was a new attorney. This was a drug sale case with an undercover officer who claimed our client sold him drugs inside a bodega. The client had never been arrested before, and if convicted, was not only facing prison, but certain deportation. The undercover testifies that he goes into this bodega, walks up to this client and says, "Hey, I have some women, and do you know where I can score coke?" So on summation, Sam, of course, decides to act out this whole scene to highlight the absurdity of the story. So you're at a bodega trying to buy a beer, and this random guy out of the blue just says, "I have women, and by the way, can I have some coke?" And then Sam turns to the jury and says, "I would be like, 'What on earth, you creep?'" And the juror in the front row bursts out laughing, and then keeps on laughing, and then is laughing so hard that the judge has to stop everything and ask her if she's okay, because she's now basically crying from all the laughter. Sam was really proud of this moment. It was also during this trial that the judge starts a conversation at the bench with Sam and the DA about their lives. So Sam mentions that he had been an actor before becoming a lawyer. In a tone that seemed not at all kind to Sam, the DA turns to him and says, "Oh, how'd that go?" The laughing juror and 11 others quickly acquitted Sam's client. And after the verdict, Sam said he really, really wanted to turn to the DA and say, "Oh, how'd that go for you?" But he didn't. Maybe it was because Sam, as he liked to remind Mary, was the ABA negotiating champion while at law school, where they probably taught people to stay away from retributive comments. But really, it was because he was just such a good, gracious, and magnanimous person, and always treated his adversaries with respect, even when they probably didn't deserve it. Sam's passion for the work, of course, ran deeper than any trial. When he stood next to his client in a courtroom at any time, it was obvious that everything he said and everything he did was to protect his client, and that he would always do so. One of Sam's clients said to me, "I never had an attorney like Mr. Howell. He would just call to check on me, to talk to me about life, to make sure I was doing well. With him, I felt like everything was okay." Sam was a teacher of his craft. There are countless attorneys whose approach to our work was transformed because of Sam. Each one of them would say, in no uncertain terms, that the experience of working with Sam, learning from him how to build a case, how to think creatively, and how to find their own voice, made them more tenacious, more confident, and was among the best memories they have of being an attorney in our office. His generosity was boundless. Anytime, and I mean really anytime, a client was going to testify in the grand jury or at trial, and the attorney wanted the client to experience beforehand what cross-examination would be like, it was Sam we all turned to. And no matter how busy he was, or how overwhelmed he was with his own work, Sam would always say, of course. He played a devastatingly good prosecutor during those sessions. In fact, he was so good, some clients would turn to their attorneys and say, "Hey, are you sure he's a defense attorney and not a prosecutor?" But before Sam left the room, he would always turn to the client and say, "I'm sorry I had to do that. I'm really, really on your side. I promise." And he was. Maya Angelou said, "If you get, give. If you learn, teach. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." And that has always been Sam.
Thank you, Jenny. We're now going to hear from Myrna, who was the officiant of Sam and Mary's wedding so many years ago. I've witnessed her work. She lived across the street from Mary when Mary was growing up, and her daughter was best friend growing up. So Myrna, please. It's not like we met 10 minutes ago. It's not 5 minutes.
Hi, everyone. As Sean said, I first knew Mary when she was in the 4th grade, and the Pepito family, those New Yorkers, moved across the street from me. I'm from Kansas, and it was a joyous time of being with Kathy and the whole Pepito family, and I've loved Mary for a very long time. I don't know if you remember, Mary, one day you just came over to my house and said, "You have anything you need done?" And you went in the kitchen and worked with me. But it was like that you all were talking about the wall between you that wasn't a wall. The street between us wasn't a street. We were in and out of each other's houses a lot. And Jerry, your father, was there a lot too. Thank you for inviting me to speak here. It's an honor, and I've loved hearing what everyone said about Sam and getting to know him even better. One of the joys, the pure joys, most of the time, of being a minister is that you get to marry people who are deeply in love. And Mary and Sam were crazy about each other. We saw the boys come and go through the days across the street. There were some good-looking boys that came and went through there. But we kind of knew when Sam was the one, and to see them together was to understand it. How many of you were at the wedding? Were any of you there? Oh my gosh. Well, for those of you who are from around here and not Oklahoma, thanks for coming. It was hot, and it is hot there as I speak. That wedding was so well planned, and I got to go out and visit with Kathy, and it was great fun. But it was also flexible and spontaneous, just as this is. Both of those events are sacred. The union of the spirits of Mary and Sam in August of 1997, and our gathering today to remember Sam, that great spirit who is with us today. At both events, we heard and continue to hear so many reflections of who Sam was, of his character, and he was a character. The Hebrew Bible tells the story of Micah, the prophet, who says to people, "God has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you?" And I imagine most of you know the answer: to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, I don't know if Sam was a Buddhist, or or what he was, but I do know that he loved justice, and he loved kindness, and he walked in loving kindness. through his dedication to his calling to obtain justice, through his work at Legal Aid, to his kindness to his family and friends, to animals, and especially dogs, and to people in the park, and his general spirit of hospitality to others. That was the character of the character that was Sam Howell. And so, to conclude, see, ministers don't always talk a long time. I'm hoping that we all carry Sam's spirit, that magnanimous, loving, lovely spirit with us here while we're together, and take it with us to wherever we go, so that his generosity, his kindness, his intellect, and his sensitivity lives on in those of us who were fortunate enough to love him and be loved by him. I give thanks for the character that was the character and the spirit of Sam Howell, and for Mary Beth Pepito.
Thank you, Myrna. Very beautiful. And we're winding it up now, or winding down now. I do have to tell you all that this, you know, and I've noticed this is not my usual gig, being an MC. And as a matter of fact, I was substituted in at the last minute when our MC, Mark Conklin, a very old friend of Sam and Mary, managed to come in. Oh, fuck. So I'm going to ask. I'm messing up the order a little bit, so I'm going to ask Mark and Noel to say a few words, then I'm going to get to Justin and Judd. Sorry, I've got a tiny email that I'm messing up the order, so we're going to hear from Judd. Then I'm going to say a few things for about 40 minutes, so feel free. I believe the bar is still open, so feel free to refresh during Mark and Noel.
Hi, everyone.
Better late than never.
Yeah, we had quite an ordeal getting here, and so good to be here. I'm Mark Conklin, and I met Sam very early freshman year at Northwestern. With Noel, we started a theater company in New York.
We were his roommate for 2 years when he was in law school, and Mark was the best man at Sam and Mary's wedding, and we got up here and did a toast when they got married, and I just watched it, and we were so charming then. While I feel so sad that Sam is gone, I'm even angry that there's going to be no more Sam. And when, as Sean put it in his fabulous obituary, that's really all we wanted was more Sam. But I'm so happy that we made it here today, and that we can be here with all of you who love Sam dearly as we do. And I'm so lucky to have known him, lucky to have felt his bear hugs and heard his fabulous voice and bathed in his enormous veiny laugh, which was just so infectious. So I'm hoping everyone will just start from the beginning so I can see everything. But I'm sure there are lots of memories of, how wonderful Sam is. And I've been thinking about Sam's death and time, and how today and in the present, time moves so fast, like we're on a fast forward button. But when I think of the past, it's suspended and so clear in my memories. And we were so lucky to have so much time with Sam, not enough, but it feels like all of those memories are ever present.
And that is such a gift. And he came to me in a dream when he was in the hospital. And in that dream, he said, "I'm going soon, but I will see you again." And I hope that I do have more time with Sam. But the time we had is still here. I don't even understand that it isn't, because it was 7 years ago that I was here, that I saw you guys last. I was robbed. I thought there would be more time, but what we had was big.
So I hope that this day, and I hope it doesn't end. We just got here, so you've got some catching up to do. I hope that it is, not remembering him with only sadness, but celebrating him. And I feel like, for me, celebrating him is to get. I need to get into the right gear for celebrating Sam, who loved it up here, and had a particular garb. So I hope I'm here to celebrate Sam with you all.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad to be here with you.
Thanks, Mark and Noel. Glad you could make it. Justin, one of Sam's oldest friends, if not his oldest friend, certainly older than me, as a friend, who spent a million summers here on Cape Cod with Sam and Mary. And I skipped him, and I'm sorry, Joe.
Before I start, if anybody wants to just get out of their chairs and stretch their butts, I've been sitting there as long as everybody, and it might feel good just to get up for a second, do a little stretch. Greetings all. It's good to see so many of Sam's friends, his family, and Mary. Obviously, we'd rather have it if Sam was here today instead of talking about him. It's not the case. As anyone that knew Sam knows, Sam loved to laugh. He also loved to make others laugh. I think today, if Sam were here, he'd be most adamant that we laugh while reflecting about him. In that vein, I want to read something that I read to Sam last summer in the porch during his and Mary's annual trip to Truro. It was during one of the lulls in vacation, perhaps between some of the visitors having departed, others yet to arrive. It was just Sam and me sitting in the porch, most likely enjoying an afternoon beverage post-golf. I believe Mary, Sarah, and Eve were probably down at the beach. Selfishly, this was one of my favorite times to enjoy with Sam, one-on-one, though he was often so funny in groups. I should say that what I'm about to read involves golf. However, I don't think it's necessary for one to have actually played the game to appreciate it. But it doesn't hurt, especially for those high handicappers like myself and Sam, who do a lot of thinking prior to and during our backswing. I also should say that for those that never saw Sam play the game of golf, you should know he had a god-awful swing. It more resembled a hockey snapshot than the full turn of the body that you would see on TV with the pros. Nonetheless, Sam had adept hand-eye coordination, and he made his swing work. And like most of us, had a love-hate relationship with the game. He loved being out there with friends, and almost always with Sarah. On a beautiful day, or sometimes not, in the Outer Cape, making us laugh between hacks at the ball. Also, like most of us, he was typically not so pleased about his score. Anyways, this is what I read to Sam one fine afternoon last summer. It's the opening chapter of a book called The Bogeyman, written by George Plimpton. The Bogeyman, Chapter 1. My woes in golf, I have felt, have been largely psychological. When I'm playing well in the low 90s, my handicap is 18, I am still plagued with small quirks, a suspicion that, for example, just as I begin my downswing, my eyes straining with concentration, a bug or a beetle is going to suddenly materialize on the golf ball. When I'm playing badly, far more massive speculation occurs. I often sense as I commit myself to a golf swing that my body changes its corporal status completely and becomes a mechanical entity built of tubes and conduits and boiler rooms here and there with big dials and gauges to check. A Brobdingnagian, I had to look that up, it means wicked big, structure put together by a team of brilliant engineers, but manned largely by a dispirited, eccentric group of dissolutes, men with drinking problems, who do not see very well and who are plagued by liver complaints. The structure they work in is enormous. I see myself as a monstrous man colossus poised high over the golf ball, a spheroid that is barely discernible 14 stories down on its tee. From above, staring through the windows of the eyes, which bulge like great bay porches, is an unsteady group, as I see them, of Japanese Navy men. Admirals, most of them. In their hands they hold ancient, useless voice tubes into which they yell the familiar orders. Eye on the ball, chin steady, left arm stiff, flex the knees, swing from inside out, follow through, keep head down. Since the voice tubes are useless, the cries drift down the long corridors and shaftways between the iron tendons and muscles and echo into vacant chambers and out, until finally, as a burble of a sound, they reach the control centers. These posts are situated at the joints, and in charge are the dissolutes I mentioned. Typical of them, a cantankerous elder perched on a metal stool, half a bottle of rye on the floor beside him, his ear cocked for the orders that he acknowledges with the ancient epithets, and yelling back up to the quarters, "Ah, your father's mustache," and such things. And if he's of a mind, he'll reach for the controls, like the banks of tall levers one remembers from railroad yard switch houses. And perhaps he'll pull the proper lever, and perhaps not. So that in turn, the whole apparatus, bent on hitting a golf ball smartly, tips and convolutes and lunges. The Japanese admirals, clutching each other for support in the main control center up in the head of the structure, rocks and creaks. And when the golf shot is on its way, the Navy men get to their feet and peer out through their eyes and report, "A shank! A shank! My God, we've hit another shank!" They stir about in the control center, drinking paper-thin cups of rice wine, consoling themselves, and every once in a while, one of them will reach for a voice tube and shout, "Smarten up down there!" Down below in the dark reaches of the structure, the dissolutes reach for their rye, tittering, and they've got their feet up on the levers, and perhaps soon it will be time for them to read the evening newspaper. It goes on. I recommend the book, by the way. When I read that to Sam last summer on the porch, he and I both were pretty much in tears from laughing so hard, because it's so damn close to the truth of how we swing a golf club and what we think about. I also read that to Sam the last time I saw him, lying dying in his hospital bed. I hope he was able to laugh in that big brain of his, even if he couldn't laugh out loud. I miss my dear friend terribly. Cheers to humorous and fond memories of Sam.
I just want to apologize for that phone, but I do believe that Sam enjoyed that because it was his phone that I forgot to mute. So, thank you, Justin.
All right, I got one more for you. I hope everyone's got the energy. we've run over a little bit. Some of this is my bad administration. Some of this has been beyond my control. So again, feel free though to get up and walk away and get something to drink or whatever you need. As I said before, I met Sam at Northwestern in 1980. We were good friends, and we shared a huge group of good friends that have continued in many ways over the years and sort of grown out to include each other's friends. Sam and I were on the same softball team. We were on the same college bowl, It's academic team. We performed in a play together. But during college, we weren't terribly close. But for 25 years after that, I should say the first 25 years after that, we kept in contact. I lived in New York City for a couple years. We went to many weddings together. We got closer. But it was really here on the Cape where I visited to vacation with Sam and Mary in the past 15 years, where Sam and I became, to use a benighted phrase, best friends. We became terribly close. Sam is someone who had a gift for friendship, though, and I can say with some confidence over the years that he had many best friends over the years. He was a good friend, and it came easily to him. So I'm going to open in mystery to set the scene here in Provincetown. In 2013, he picked me up at the Fast Boat Ferry Landing. So we hugged, we had a cigarette, we got in the Mercedes-Benz. Then Sam, before he started the car, turned to me and said, "We have to make one stop. I have to apologize to someone." Now, I never really found out the details of the apology, but it was enough for me on that visit to begin on this charming note of Sam going, "We're going on a little forgiveness tour to start with." So it's always good to start with the inscrutable, I think, in a eulogy. Although I once said to Sam, "Sam, you're inscrutable." And he instantly replied in that Howell way, "Disagreed. I'm eminently scrutable." Sam was sharp, he was funny, he was emotional, he was fast, he was dominating, he was mysterious. So I just want to tell a couple Sam Howell stories. More scene setting. In 2010, right after I'd been to the Cape, he sent me an email. I guess there'd been a shark attack. There must have been. And he wrote me at the tag end, P.S. in an email. "Sharks don't scare me one damn bit. My guess is that they fear me." So you want to compose words about a beloved friend, deeply, just beginning to realize how much I miss Sam. But you want to keep it light and have laughter in it. But there was a paradox to me in writing this. Number one, Sam wasn't going to hear it. So how could whatever I say today possibly matter without hearing Sam maniacally giggling in the back, without his stamp of approval, and without afterwards some notes from his acting career? The second option would be, this is the most consequential speech I've ever given or will ever give. As so many of us have already said, we've been touched and changed and somehow improved by Sam. So I have to testify on his behalf and against him at the same time, which, as a lawyer, he would appreciate. I must bear witness to a room full of judgmental mini-Sams, which you all are, while Sam's entire soul hangs over us like a thundercloud, or, more fittingly for the Cape, a billion mosquitoes. Each of us has 1,000 Sam stories, and each one of them is important and real and is a comfort to all of us to share with all of us. Increasingly, I get the feeling that Sam is going to walk around the corner and be there with me wherever I am. I can practically see him. I can definitely hear him. "Sean Idge, how are you, Idge? Idge." Let me explain Idge. There's no explanation for Idge. Sam created memes long before there was an internet. Sam was the first broadband. Idge, it's yet another thing. He just tacked on the suffix "idge" to words as the mood struck him. I tell you this all because I miss saying "idge," and now you can all say it with me. Idge. Thank you. There'll be more call and response. This is the time for the call and response. Another even more scrutable Sam apology story, the Happy Mainer story. This is back in the 1980s when I too lived briefly in New York City. I had borrowed my sister's red 1972 Chevy Malibu to move from Manhattan to Brooklyn, or Brooklyn to Manhattan. I'm not sure where we were. Sam helped and was sitting up in the front seat with me as we drove back and forth. My sister, who owned the car, loved visiting Maine, and so she had a Happy Mainer stuffed doll hanging from the rear view mirror, a jolly-looking man in a yellow rain slicker and a rain hat, holding a lobster in his hand. Sam, who had lived in Maine as a child for about a hot minute, I think, but loved to tell people that he was from Maine, put up with the doll swaying in front of his face for all of 5 minutes as it dangled right at the edge of the vision. We're speeding up FDR Drive. And finally, with sort of a Sam prototypical gargled roar, he ripped the doll off the mirror and threw it out the window into the East River. Over many years of retelling the story, he made me tell it again and again, each time crying with laughter, and then with real regret, and then with laughter again. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," Sam would say, spraying tears, guffawing. "Please tell your sister I'm sorry." I already told her, Sam, she loathes you. Well, okay then, fine. Tell the story again, please. So things Sam hated that I know of: the New York Yankees, driving onto the Cape on the weekend, Neil Young, and of course, the Happy Mainer. Again, I wanted to do yucks. I wanted to do funny first lines. I wanted to hear Sam laughing in my mind during a speech like this. But Sam was complex. He was sort of a tragic clown, sort of a comic philosopher, a poet of each dreadful, glorious human moment. When you talk about his conversation with you about Buddhism and the Buddhists, with Sam, you couldn't really tell sometimes. Were you being mocked? But if you knew him well enough and spent enough time with you, he too was sort of tormented by that. Do I believe this? Do I half believe this? When Sam suffered, he 100% suffered. When he triumphed, he 100% triumphed and dominated. When he laughed, it was the loudest laugh in the room. He was unforgivable and totally innocent at the same time. He was incorrigibly gentle and gently incorrigible. He was tender. I remember him weeping at Joe and Donna's wedding in California in the mountains, leaning against a split rail fence as the vows were spoken. He cried at my wedding. He probably cried at yours if he was there. He was funny. He was blisteringly honest. He was at once too hard on himself and too easy. Long before Sam met Mary, when he was unhappily single briefly, some period, Sam once confronted me and my wife, Amy, and I have to do a little bit for this. He said, "How did you get her and I got nothing?" I can't make that up. But the serious side of that is, he once wrote to me a quote from a book. I'm not sure what the book was, and I don't have the exact words, but the gist of it was, you say things to yourself, you tell yourself things, and you criticize yourself, things that if someone else said them to you, you would knock them down to the ground for saying that to you. He was tough on himself. He was gimlet-eyed. He was baby-faced. He was benevolent and ruthless. Another inscrutable possible laugh line. For some reason, I think it was in New York, I believe, Sam had us all chanting for a while, "Hatred and loathing wells up in my soul. Hatred and loathing wells up in my soul." we all chanted it because Sam had chanted thusly, and therefore we were going to chant along with him. Another funny quote from him from a letter where he described playing racquetball with Ed Simon, Paul Simon's younger brother, late 80s, this is a while ago. Sam describes dominating Ed Simon. Simon was, quote, a runt of a man, no more than 5 feet tall. Sam then imagined the Simon family gathered every Thanksgiving, quote, a tiny family picking and chirping away over a Cornish game hen. He was a great, unsung writer who did not think he was a writer. I often browbeat him about not taking his writing more seriously. He had real talent. Many here today, I'm sure, have a memorable letter or an email or a note from Sam, or you remember the exact phrase Sam coined and said to you, and it never left your mind. Sam didn't write or speak as much as he engraved his words. They were important. They were meant to last. He loved words. The concentration and care he brought to his punning powers was excessive. You can never hear the Marvin Gaye song the same way again if you have ever had the luck to hear Sam pontificate on the lyric, "Sexual healing is good for me." I said before I've posted about him being a great reader of my poems, so obviously I adore him for that, how sensitive and helpful he was. But in addition to being devoted to poetry himself and loving to read poems, he also liked to mock me for it. Sean loves language, but I love to laugh. Yeah, it's funny now. So a quick short poem by Sam, a limerick. Are the children? Yeah, the children are still here. I am that man you call Sam Howell, who has both roids and fissures cheek by jowl, prompts my procto to say those will not go away, lest you apply unguents with a trowel. And to finish dismissing poets, a quick college story. A bunch of us took an intro course for our science requirement. I think it was called, we called it Physics for Poets, but I think it was actually called Special Topics in Physics, Relativity. My memory is that none of us went to any of the lectures and then showed up at the final exam in the tech lecture hall. 5 minutes after the exam started, there was a great rustling of papers, and everyone turned, and it was Sam standing up and gathering his things, then announcing to the 100 people in the room, "I'm going to get breakfast. Would anyone like to join me?" I'm not a real actor. I'm a writer with actor friends, but Sam was a great actor, and I had the luck to perform with him in a play at Northwestern, What the Butler Saw. And I'm going to give you a visual image now. You'll have to imagine him playing a cop, a drugged policeman named Sergeant Match, who was dressed in a leopard skin dress, walking across the stage going, "I'm ready to be examined when you are, doctor." That's a little weird, that one, right? Sam once wrote to me, "Please come to visit me soon. I'll bum you out in person." Live, it's even better, like theater, in which I am be-degreed. People have already talked eloquently about his intelligence. I found him one of the smartest, if not the smartest person I'd ever met in my life. There was no BSing Sam, even though he loved BS. You couldn't really fool him. He had a good sense, I think, with his friends on homing in on what was the matter with you, even if you represented that nothing was the matter. Sam had a good sense of that. I loved the talk about Sam at work. I heard from years from him what a dominant attorney he was and how he was 10-0, or he always had a football record for his record. But again, I'm almost done. I'm trumping him as a writer. Another thing he wrote to me once: I'm working arraignments. An 18-year-old little fucker won't stop talking. Asks me in the pens if I have a scrunchie for his hair or if I have access to one. Do I look like I have access to hair scrunchies? So the final turn here, which will turn toward the serious. I was sitting next to Mary when she answered Sam's phone on the morning I last saw him. It was one of his clients calling from prison about his case and Sam's defense of him. Mary explained Sam was in the hospital and was very sick, and the guy said on speakerphone, "Is he okay? Can't I just talk to him?" And I know Sam would have taken the call. He's the guy you wanted in your court. You wanted him to be your lawyer. He once said to me in an email, "How many things can a man give up? What truly will I do with all my free time? Why do trees grow so tall?" And indeed, he outgrew us all in a way. He grew right off the scene. I don't really know how to end it, and it's enough to bring Sam back to life for you, but I'd like to read a poem that he adored about a dog, which for years was on the refrigerator in Truro, if that's okay. The House Dog's Grave by Robinson Jeffers. I've changed my ways a little. I cannot now run with you along the shore in the evenings, except in a kind of dream. And you, if you dream a moment, you see me there. So leave a while the paw marks on the front door where I used to scratch to go out or in, and you'd soon open. Leave on the kitchen floor the marks of my drinking pan. I cannot lie by your fire as I used to do on the warm stone, nor at the foot of your bed. No, all the nights through I lie alone. But your kind thought has laid me less than 6 feet outside your window where firelight so often plays and where you sit to read. And I fear, often grieving for me, every night your lamplight lies on my place. You, man and woman, live so long, it is hard to think of you ever dying. A little dog would get tired living so long. I hope that when you are lying under the ground like me, your lives will appear as good and joyful as mine. No, dears, that's too much hope. You are not so well cared for as I have been and have never known the passionate, undivided fidelities that I knew. Your minds are perhaps too active, too many-sided. But to me, you were true. You were never masters, but friends. I was your friend. I loved you well and was loved. Deep love endures to the end and far past the end. If this is my end, I am not lonely, I am not afraid. I am still yours. Sam was larger than life. I'll take it a step further. Life was smaller than Sam. And he quit the scene, so. A great German poet once said, and this is finally and actually it, whatever tears, Sam would like it because it's a mixture of highbrow and lowbrow. Whatever tears one may shed, in the end, one always blows one's nose. So let me end with that. Thank you all so much. Thanks for Mary and for the family. And done.
someone to love